This is going to be the first of a series of sessions that we're going to do around hot topics in data. And we're very pleased to be able to get Akhil, Mike, and Andrew together today from different parts of the world. So yeah, I suppose to kick off things, just wanted to kind of do a few intros. So maybe we can just introduce Akhil Lalwani. Thanks for joining us, Akhil. Could you give us a bit of a intro to what you're doing these days and where you've been before?
Okay, brilliant. Andrew, thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I made sure I do the right thing by making sure I'm not on mute, which is a classic thing all of people do. You're on Zoom conversation. So hi, I am Akhil. I am the Chief Data Officer at Convex Insurance. You may or may not have heard of us. What we do is specialty insurance and reinsurance. So we insure everything that's big and ugly, from airports to snail farms to marine cargo, everything in the middle. I am new to the world of insurance. I've spent nearly 3 years there, but I still think I'm new and learning every single day in this complex world. My background is telecom, banking, law enforcement, cyber, a bit of life insurance as well, before I came to Convex to do specialty insurance.
Fantastic. I like the thing about snail farms. That was a little secret you didn't tell us before.
There's a very bad joke about it. They were very slow to respond, so we didn't insure them.
Boom, boom. Thank you for that.
They're all weak. Not.
So, Mr. Fishwick, Mr. Mike Fishwick, could you give us an intro from yourself? It'd be great to.
Been messing about in data for 30 something years now. Doing all kinds of things have been really interesting, starting with using data to work out where Marks and Spencer should build new stores around the world. Back in the days when retailers were expanding their bricks and mortar proposition. That's quite some time ago, let me tell you. Through to being the first commercially appointed Chief Data Officer in the UK when I joined Yellow Pages just before the millennium. And then I built the world's first data monetization in the business in the mobile telephone industry. And then just because I'm a bit of a masochist, decided to go and try my chance my arm in the public sector and see how far I could get, and was the Chief Digital Data and Technology Officer for an arm's length government body in the UK. So like I said, messing around with data and stuff and trying to drive value from data for the best part of 30 something years.
And you still find it interesting. That's good.
Well, I think what is really interesting is data's time has finally come.
Exactly. Renaissance, man. Thanks, Mike. And last but not least, Mr. Andrew Arn.
Hello, my name is Andrew Arn, as Mr. Turner has mentioned. Let's see. I'm an amateur cook, amateur knife maker, and an amateur snowboarder. I don't even qualify as an amateur golfer. I'm really terrible. But I have spent quite a bit of time with data, specifically enterprise data. In fact, I've built 4 enterprise data catalogs. So I have a lot of experience with, in the data space in general, managing large, very toxic data sets. Background includes work at the NYSE Euronext. We were in 12 countries, 23 electronic market centers. Did quite a bit there. I worked with a group that designed the equity options matching engine, as well as the matching. And at the time, it was the fastest matching engine, and we rolled it out pretty much all over the world. Dealt with a lot of post-trade management and governance. After that, I was at Hortonworks. So I went from a super regulated, high pressure system to an equally high pressure system, but completely unregulated open source world at Hortonworks, which is now Cloudera, and helped incubate Apache Atlas. Right. After that, I worked at for leading the product team at Waterline Data, which is now Hitachi Vantara, basically designing systems to address this data growth. And in 2018, I decided to found Praxi Data, and it's to tackle this problem. I felt that there was still quite a bit of work to be done. So we really address scalable, automated data curation. We have clients in fintech, insurance, and the Department of Defense. So thanks for joining us today.
Cool. Thank you very much. So yeah, I mean, to kick off this today's discussion, I suppose one of the things that and I think this individual or this gentleman is actually on the session today, Tim Young. I saw a post actually literally the other day which he had put on LinkedIn to it was written by the Wall Street Journal in the CIO journal for that, and it talked about some research that recently completed with roughly, I think, 10,000 CIOs and data practitioners, and the scary stuff that came out of the back of that was about the amount of business leaders that said they can't generate meaningful insights from their data, which is over a third of those people. And also 30% just felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume. If I compare to my background working in a few different companies, and particularly when I was working at Tesco, where we had this concept called DNA, data, insight, and action, it just appears to be still a huge problem. I suppose kicking off the discussion, Akhil, what's your lens on that topic?
I think it is quite fair because the biggest challenge that any organization has before we get to the point of generating insights, actionable insights, and you can use any fancy terms. The challenge is, do you really know what you have? And do you know how to make use of it? How much of it is structured that you can make use of very quickly? How much of it is actually hiding in unstructured? What I mean is in documents, in conversations, in voice notes, in Slacks. Information is everywhere, and it's a boon and a challenge as well. And the biggest challenge organizations have is, how do you make sure that what you're building does not turn into a dump where people just push information in and you don't know how to use it, nor do you have tools to extract it and make meaningful sense of that information. And one of the other challenges people have is the concept of driving value. Like Mike said, right? It's great to have a lot of data. It's great to be able to use it. It's great to have all the tools, but do you really know what do you want at the end? Do you really know what your experiment should do for you in the end? So it can get very overwhelming. So it's very important to have that focus on what are we trying to achieve in the end and take incremental steps towards that goal.
Okay. That sounds right. That sounds really. I just thought that the scary thing was about the amount of people that seem to still be flying blind. We're now in 2023, and it sounds like even despite decades of investment, we've still got a gap. But anyway, I suppose that's the whole point of this discussion today. Mike, any perspectives from your side?
Yeah, well, first of all, I suppose it's come back at you. What's the investment been in? And I still think data to a large degree suffers from hype curve mentality. There's no silver bullet with regard to it. And of course, there's as I said, the hype curve. Data is the answer to transforming everything and solving everything and taking growth to the top line and improving gross margin on the bottom line, and it's going to solve everything. So it sets the expectation of senior executives. But of course, one of the interesting aspects of this is, what do you need to do in order to get really clear, to Akhil's point, about what value it is you're trying to drive? When we were at Telefonica and trying to set up the data monetization business, trying to define the products that we were going to try and build and take to market required real clarity of thinking from the data professionals, right? It wasn't the finance people or the HR people or the operations people. And, you know, as you will know, Andrew, you know, the operations people have got significant roles to play in a mobile telecommunications organization.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't those people who created the, you know, the roadmap of what we're trying to do and where we're trying to get to. And so for me, there's a whole host of things wrapped up in all of this. It doesn't surprise me, like Akhil said, you know, it's fair. We have expectation management, which you know, the CEO expects that, you know, I can just fire a silver bullet and all the problems go away. That's a challenge. Managing those expectations is a challenge. The hard yards you have to go through to get the data prepped to be fit for purpose to the things that you want to be able to do. And nobody understands that. But actually, you know, if we hadn't had 30 years of the business doing X, Y, and Z and not really thinking about data as a valuable organizational asset.
Yeah.
Then you've got an awful lot of unraveling the spaghetti that you need to do, and that takes time and it's expensive. And then of course there's the organizational maturity and literacy around being able to shape and drive some of these things, and thereby have the influencing skills as well to transform the organization's thinking. Or the department, you know, I use the organization as a metaphor for that thing, that entity that's looking to make the change.
So you think there's a bit about like the nirvana, there's the kind of the senior execs think there's a nirvana there, there's a gold mine there, but actually they don't understand the work to get there.
My experience is that there is a belief that there's a gold mine. You know, they need to invest a little bit to, you know, to go find it. But actually, the reality on the ground is there's an awful lot more to it than that. And that, of course, you know, that's then about transformational stakeholder management. It's about engagement, expectation management. It's about being able to explain what needs to be done first and why it needs to be done and the order it needs to be done, you know, and Andrew talking about, you know, curating complex data sets. You know, these are just things that have to be done if you're gonna get the data to a point where it is in some way able to support the development of insight and thereby become actionable. So, you know, I think the real issue is maturity. And
across a number of dimensions, it sounds like as well. It's not just
absolutely,
one.
Absolutely. But I also think that it is, you know, it is about recognizing the role that data needs to play or has played in the past, and therefore what you need to do to get it to where it needs to be. So dealing with all of those aspects is not an easy thing to do, and for those that are new to the being practitioners, I absolutely can see it would be overwhelming.
Cool. Okay, that's good. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, Andrew, on your side, I mean, I know that what as part of your intro you said about the experience in the markets and, you know, working at the exchange, you know, the New York Stock Exchange. I mean, the amount of data you've got flying around that kind of business is significant. What's your kind of lens on this topic? It's from your point of view.
Yeah, you know, without rehashing things that have been, you know, why do I have to go third? Like after Akhil and Mike, they kind of took all the good stuff already. But you know,
say the best till last. They say the best till last. They're supposed to say, are they?
Exactly. So, thank you very much. Nice save. So basically, working at the exchange was kind of like a sentinel or a harbinger. We kind of got a flood of data prior to any other large kind of vertical. And it came at us pretty hard and fast. So we had to learn some lessons quickly. We, and in some ways have been mitigated by like technology, like they're better, faster, bigger things. Like now you can put stuff in the cloud. But there's a lot of problems that still remain, right? I think sometimes there's a lot of noise, as Mike has mentioned. There's a lot of hype, and sometimes you need to step back and think, what are the fundamental things that that are causing this heartache and this consternation, right? I mean, the lead paragraph or the salient point of the article that we started with was that 33% of business leaders can't generate meaningful insight. Well, what is the impact of that? What does that actually mean, right? So the impact is that they can't make good decisions, right? It means that their agility is substantially compromised. Either they don't have confidence in the decisions they're making, or they can't make them because they don't have enough information to begin with, right? So they're afraid of making the wrong decision, right? And that's really it, right? It boils down to the ability to make smart decisions, right? And that's what I think we lose sight of sometimes. And you can get mired in buying a gazillion tools that do a gazillion things. It doesn't matter if the data is in Hadoop, on-prem on a bunch of NAS or a bunch of Teradata boxes or in the cloud. The problem is the same. You need to be able to look across the data, get the insights you need, but why? To get that agility. So, but there are some new wrinkles. So sometimes we have structured data now, and because of the way it's structured, you have unstructured data hiding in structured data, right? Like you have like these note fields or whatever field, right? And you can have that, right? We collect so much data now that we have like unanticipated liabilities. You might have hoovered up something that causes a governance or compliance problem, which you don't even know about because you haven't, to Akhil's point, you haven't even done the inventory to figure out what you've got. So now you have a liability that is completely wide open, right? So you have those exposures.
But it's a good question. I mean, is it an education? So, I mean, you're raising obviously some foundational issues here. Is it education and culture that's causing some of these issues as well? It sounds like there's a gap in there as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is, but it's a constant battle. This is not something that you're going to be able to win. This is a constant struggle, but the underlying point is that it needs to be managed. There has to be a shift in mentality to really focus on maintaining this agility. There's always going to be new things. There's always going to be new technologies. Data is going to transform itself. As I mentioned, you're going to have semi-structured data or unstructured data in structured data. Like if you store JSONs or if you use a graph database, it is technically structured, but really it's not, So these are things that are going to always happen, and we should expect them to happen. Really, what we want to do.
But the point I was trying to make was: is there an issue in the organization where you need to educate? Because you said technologies are always going to change.
Yes.
But is it back to fundamental education at the exec level who've got these expectations of X, and there's a gap to what the organization can deliver? So is there an education and culture issue that we're coming on? Akhil, I don't know if you want to jump in there and use pointing.
So I think there are two fundamental issues. And in my experience, they're not technology related. It may be surprising to a few people and not so much to others, but it is actually not technology related. If we can put people on the moon, I'm pretty sure we can help any organization solve their data analytics, insights, intelligence problems as well. So the two fundamental questions, according to me, are in our excitement to do really cool stuff, we forget to build the foundations. And the foundations have to instill trust in the data in an organization, because we can do all this magic. We can do AI, machine learning, we can give it different names and use different technologies. But if people fundamentally cannot trust the underlying data that is driving those decisions, you find people cannot use it. Right. I'm going to Andrew's point. It is not so much people don't have the data or cannot use it or don't want to use it. You walk into a meeting, and when three people that you really want to believe in and trust and help you make the decision give you fundamentally three different pieces of information, how does anybody reach a conclusion, right? So the conclusion is this is all wrong, go back and fundamentally start again. So that trust is very important. So it's not just about using really fun technology. It's about making sure that that technology gives you the right answers and the quality of the data is correct. So there's no gap in the understanding and the quality of the data. That's the first bit. And the second bit is culture. And that culture encompasses a load of things. It starts from people collecting data for themselves, which encourages silos. So we need to widen our breadth and say, this data is not for me, it's not for my department, it's for the organization.
Yes.
And that's fundamentally one of the biggest challenges in any organization, because everybody has their secret black book. Everybody wants to hold data to themselves. And this not just causes a challenge in the near term, it causes proliferation of data through numbers of years. So I've had the benefit of working in large enterprise organizations that have been around for 200-300 odd years, and now working in a startup, which is absolutely fascinating. So we've had the benefit.
You would call Convex a startup then? That's interesting.
I think I wouldn't, because of the and where we are in our journey and what we are doing, which is phenomenal. Thanks to a lot of very smart and intelligent people and the trust of our investors. But we operate like a startup. We don't want to lose that ethos and that spirit of being a startup. So we've had the opportunity to start clean, and we've wanted to adopt some of these challenges or tackle them right from the outset. So, but it's not.
So you don't have the kind of the legacy of all that kind of the decades of years before that you've got to reshape. You kind of like start with a blank canvas to a certain extent. Is that right? Or
yeah, absolutely. From a data perspective and a technology perspective, yes, but not from a mindset perspective. So you
right, okay.
Operated the same way they've operated for the last 30, 40, 50 years, have been extremely successful. How do you take that culture and take them to the world of today? And
right.
And it has to be done along with people. You cannot surprise them, is the fundamental approach that I take, because you've got to make.
So that's an interesting mashup, isn't it, between that kind of your leadership team who are very, very successful in insurance, and then with the modern data thinking and approach that you've been bringing in. It's must be a real melting pot.
Oh, it's absolutely phenomenal. And the support that we have is encouraging right from the top, which I think you need in any organization to succeed. But at the same time, having the tenacity to create that culture and embed, take people on that journey is fundamentally important. So those two, for me, are the most fundamental building blocks.
Interesting. Yeah. I noticed that Mike was smiling, by the way. I just want to pick up on Mike smiling. He was smiling when you were talking, so I want to find out what he's smiling about.
Well, I noticed that Andrew's looking to come in, so I'll just say I was smiling at the whole point around culture and you know the whole all of the discussions around the creation of the data and the persistence of it and all those sorts of things. It just took me back to I first got involved in all of this by something called data flow diagrams, which were I don't
know what you're talking about, Mike. I can't remember those at all.
It's
you mean ERDs? You mean ERDs?
No. DFDs.
DFDs. DFDs. That's right. DFDs, yeah. I was back at the entity level. Sorry.
Jordan and Jackson, and they do developing an analytical discipline for using those things taught me a huge amount, because it also highlighted actually most people, when they're dealing with operational process, they don't really care about the role of the data other than it supports the process that they're undertaking. Its future secondary purposes have never ever been considered before.
Yeah, so they've got that kind of that focus on the part of the person.
Yeah. Don't worry about that data stuff. Just build the process, right? And of course, what goes through a process? Well, data goes through a process, and that's what I was smiling at.
And then that bites you later, if you don't think about that, yeah.
And I think the whole point about the primary and secondary use of the data, at this time where we're in this a transformational landscape, the opportunity, and Akhil's touched on it, the opportunity is actually to think about all of the uses of the data as an integral part of your transformational journey, not just get what we do today digital.
Yeah. Lift and shift. Yeah.
So
sorry, Andrew. I think you were putting your hand up, so we don't want to forget that.
Yeah, and this might be a good segue to the next topic about culture, because I think, as Akhil mentioned, this is really fundamental. So, you can buy your way to new technology, but that has to be in lockstep and coordinated with a agility in culture, right? So, if you look at a lot of companies, they have an innovative stage where they kind of, disrupted the market. They did something different. They did something more efficient. Then they kind of got to a mature state, and then they started, in a decline, right? And if you look at that, really, it's a cultural thing. They want to take less risks, right? They want to just maximize for different things, not for the future perhaps, but for short-term revenue, for whatever reasons. But none of that stuff is sustainable without a certain minimum level of agility to be able to react to competitors, right? Because if you ossify and you don't have this agility, that's what startups are all about, right? They disrupt, and that's where they're going to come and get you. So agility is the name of the game, and agility comes not through just culture, but also technology. They have to come together. And it's also a mindset. The management, the leadership needs to embrace this notion of constant change and agility as that secret sauce. So anyway,
I suppose picking up on that point, it's interesting because I picked up a stat the other day about, and it's quite well. The stat was basically that people are going to be investing, or the business is going to be investing about $3.7 trillion in digital transformation in 2026. And the current assessment is that 70% of that will fail. So when you think about that, it's very in vogue to do digital transformation. I suppose what are we seeing? What we seeing we need to invest in?
I want to come in there, Mr. T, because Andrew's point about agility, absolutely get it. But if you don't have data as an integral part of the agility mindset, then you'll look to build more. You'll look to do what you do in a more agile fashion. You won't look to actually say, well, there are primary, secondary, and tertiary opportunities with all of the stuff that flows through the organization, i.e., its data. So you have to have a data mindset, even when you're really focused organizationally on increasing organizational agility. That agility won't really come unless you think about the data.
But the reason I made that point a bit earlier, you see, is the headline of digital transformation, is that losing the piece around the data side? Are you seeing any issues around that? I suppose that's what
I think the focus is so much on essentially digitalization, rather than, and I know I'm showing my age here, effectively the business process re-engineering, and the process re-engineering aspect of that, and designing yourself, almost internally reinventing yourself as a digital and data-centric organization, rather than staying as you are, but changing the platform that you operate on. And you see an awful lot of transformational activity not being truly transformative.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Certainly not from a data perspective.
Yeah, it's about how it gets the kind of the position at the table, and to be not just about the process, but also about the data as well.
I personally am not too concerned with how people label it. Digital transformation, data journeys, technology transformations. I think the fundamental aspect is they are all inseparable, right?
Yes.
And you got to understand that data cannot exist without process, technology, and people. And for me, people are fundamentally important because they are the engines that are interacting with, following the process, interacting with the technology, creating data, and at the end of the funnel, consuming the data as well to drive insights and make the right decisions. So you almost need this holy trinity to come together and make data useful, because as the role of data needs to be clear in an organization, and that is what I find missing in a lot of places. When people say we want to go on this transformation journey and they can data, digital technology, very selfishly, my question is, what is the role of data and what do you expect the role of data to be? And more often than not, you'll find senior execs coming saying, I need a report at the end of this. And so if your view is so myopic that it's all about getting a report, then you really don't need to transform yourself. You just need to get better at reporting, right? But the question that we need to ask is data going to drive fundamentally growth for your business? How does it impact your business strategy? How does it drive your better customer experience? And you know what? How does it bring you operational efficiency? Unless you look at data from all of these lenses, you are fundamentally creating a gap in your approach. And it's not surprising that a lot of people start tripping very soon when they go on this journey.
Yeah, and I think that really is the answer to your question, Mr. Turner, why so many fail, right? Because they have this broad notion that, oh, everybody else is doing this. This is what we should be doing. We have too much data. We need to do something with it. But they don't have a clear purpose of what it is, right? And that leads to the same mindset, right? Like, what are you looking for? So in pharmaceutical industries, traditionally, the large molecule studies have an 85% failure rate, which is not great, but the ones that they do get are pretty innovative. And the reason why that they go through this effort is that when they go through the research part, they're looking for non-linear growth. They're looking for new stuff that they haven't seen before, right? And this is where, you know, AI and automated technologies are really helping them. So that percentage will go up dramatically going
You mean
forward.
they're looking for exponential opportunities, basically?
They're looking for new innovations that did not exist before, that they could not have predicted before.
Oh, like a white space kind of thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they know that's there. They know it's hard, but they're going to look for it. But they're really focusing on the data to look for those clues. And it's taken them a long time to do this, but they're all doing it now. So their leadership mentality is to say, look, we don't want to just do what we did before better. We need to do something new.
Different.
And that is that agility that we were talking about. And to Akhil's point, it's not just another report, right? It's to actually look for new stuff. So that nonlinear growth has really big impact. Like, it could solve cancer faster, right? Or you could get a COVID vaccine, which was really mind-boggling. They use a lot of new technologies to get that. So it is making real world differences, and it does pay off, but it requires a mentality. Some of those efforts may not work, or it may not bear fruit for a while. But you can't just blindly go into it, just like pouring money and buying a bunch of consulting and hopefully, you know, getting some kind of result. You know, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, so just, yeah, thank you for that. I mean, so switching the topic just back to the kind of this data deluge, data growth issue. I mean, one of the things that, you know, I suppose my question was going to be about, where is this growth coming from? You know, there's obviously different types of data out there. I know, Mike, that you've got some perspectives and some kind of thoughts about that. There's some kind of big strategic questions around this. Could you kind of explain to the panel what you've been seeing in that area?
Well, I mean, I suppose it's 15 years ago now. I wrote a brief paper around informational ambidexterity, and basically what we were looking, you know, which was very, you know, intellectually and grandiose kind of terminology as it needed to be for an academic paper. But at its core, what we were trying to do was we were trying to segment where the data was, you know, in a generic and very strategic fashion. And you had, and both Andrew and Akhil have touched on this, structured data and unstructured data. And yeah, we can now, you know, finesse that with semi-structured and so on and so forth. But at its core, you had, you know, numerical data in columns, like in a, you know, or an address field, you know, in an ERP. So in that kind of, you know, very structured kind of systems of record kind of world. And then you had, with the proliferation of online forms and documents and those kinds of things, you've got text strings. So although it's electronic, it's not, you know, it hasn't already been given its semantic meaning. Its semantic meaning comes from reading the piece of the sentence and the language. So we kind of tried to say, well, okay, you've got these two fundamental categories of data, and you need to do fundamentally two things with it. You need to manage it, and then you need to find ways to exploit it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, can you exploit it before you manage it? Well, if you're in Akhil's world and you're building a business with this holy trinity of the people, process, and kind of technology / information technology, and you're building that without any gaps, so you have a virtuous circle associated with that, then the whole thing becomes less about just the gold rush and kind of sifting in the river for nuggets of gold, and becomes much more about the fact that you've done a geological survey and you know where you've got to drill in order to find the black gold. So essentially, all we tried to do was to say, you've got this simple 2x2 to control and exploit the data, whether that's structured or unstructured. And of course, most people have historically, this is where we've kind of come up from, we want to exploit our structured data. We want to produce, to Akhil's point again, a report. But what we actually want to do is we want to compare this time period with that time period, or this region with that region, or whatever it is, right? So it becomes operational and analytical, but doesn't become derived and insightful or predictive and modeled. Okay. But then you move to the predictive and the modeled, and I think about my time at M&S, and what we did was we used Newtonian physics to build mathematical models to effectively predict how much a Marks and Spencer store would take if we were to plonk a new store in position, right? And it's 30 odd years ago now, so it's pretty old. It's pretty old hat, except that it isn't, because we were using neural network techniques to determine where the boundaries were between people would and wouldn't travel.
Yeah, the drive time.
And then we were codifying all of those things. So effectively, that's and then the codification, when the data got updated, the model would automatically rerun, and you get a new result out. Well, and you're calling on all of these core level algorithms. Well, that's essentially, in principle, the AI machine learning operationalization of an AI machine learning world today. But it did effectively give you this very simple view of the world of managing the data and exploiting it. And everybody wanted to exploit their structured data. But if you didn't manage it, you didn't deal with the quality issues, to deal with the historical nature of the way in which the data has been managed, then you weren't really going to be able to exploit it. And then, of course, where was the growth coming from? Well, the growth was coming from, everything from, a gazillion
clickstream, web blogs, all that kind of stuff.
And importantly, to Andrew's point, this kind of more nascent, I suppose, semi-structured world of electronic forms. But even that then needs to be given some degree of insight and structured meaning, so that you can derive a broader insight from it. So that really is, where
it's kind of like, so it's the two dimensions are kind of controlled or exploited, and then also structured or unstructured that you were looking at.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose, Akhil, what's been your experience in insurance with that? Is that a problem for you? Has that been something that's reared its head and you've had to tackle with, or is that being straightforward?
I think we've been fortunate to be able to tackle it, like I said, from the beginning, and create that culture. We have a lot of support in the organization, which goes a long way to embed that culture on an ongoing basis. We have to work towards it, but you have to make sure that you take people on that journey. So, and it's very important to understand that this data that we talk about today, and the plethora of it, and the gamut of it, has always existed. Technology has made it more accessible, and we've been trying to exploit it. the challenge we have is going back to the first conversation that we had at the start of this meet is, do you really know what you want at the end of it? Are you know, a lot of these things become R&D projects. Oh, I have this information. What can I do with it? Rather than saying, what is the business goal that I'm trying to achieve? And work backwards to say, what do I need to satiate the need of the business, right? So yes, there has to be space for experimental stuff as well, which says, I don't know what I don't know. So I'm going to spend some time working on this and come up with some cracking insight. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, I'm going to fail. But at the end of the day, we are a business. We are here to make our customers' lives better. We are here to make our balance sheet stronger. How do we make sure that we are giving business the right impetus, the right drive, and answering the questions they need to service our customers better in the end should be front and center of our data journeys and our digital transformation journey, however we want to label it. And that is the problem. So it's not about creating a bigger funnel to pull more information in. It's about making sure that you can manage that flow of information to the right end that you want to deliver.
And it sounds like there's you know, people are obviously striving to do that. It sounds like a skill set and education issue as well, about getting people to focus on the way they do that, the way they deliver that, and not kind of get into that shiny object syndrome, just where you can get with some things these days. You know, it's keeping, you know, aligning the project and setting it for success.
Yeah, I think doing it in smaller steps rather than waiting for that big bang moment helps. You start to prove value as you go and get the support of the organization behind you, and then start to do more. And then when you're in kind of doing more experimental stuff, you start the organization rallying behind you and asking for it almost, and pushing you in that direction, saying, you know what, you've got the standard stuff, Neil, stop doing it. Can you give me something more exciting now? And I find that's a better place to be in, rather than saying, you know, people turning around and say, you've got all of this, you haven't delivered value yet, and now you've jumped and you're trying to do something different, and you've left the last thing hanging as well. So it's, how do you strike that balance? How do you achieve that level of maturity in an organization to build the foundations, do the exciting stuff at the same time, but
I know that Andrew's, thanks for that, Akhil. I know that, Andrew, you've been working across you know, federal, healthcare, banks, and insurance companies. Like, what's your kind of take out from that? Is it common problems or specific problems or both? Or
the federal space and highly regulated industries don't seem to get as much non-structured data growth as other industries do. But in many ways, they have a larger legacy tail, meaning that most of those organizations have been around for a while, and so they have a lot more housekeeping. They have way more skeletons in their closets than like a smaller, younger company that has been driven by profit and revenue and quarterly earnings. You know, so they haven't had to have the rigor to do that pruning. And so because of that, they find themselves sometimes at a precipice where systems just stop working, right? Some insurance companies in the United States only calculate premiums every 6 months because that's as fast as their mainframes can go, which is not great because, like, you know, like the day after the premiums are calculated, they're rusting already. So the problems that we face primarily in those types of organizations can be sometimes data growth. Financial industries obviously have huge data growth, but really it's the compounding element of a lot of old tools. They have much more silos. Data formats are mismatched or quite dirty. There's another aspect to dark data or unknown data that we don't talk about that much, which is incorrectly curated or not well-known data. So if you do the Rumsfeld, thing about information, there's the known, there's the known unknown, and then there's the unknown unknown. Everybody knows about the unknown unknown. That's the thing that's the iceberg that's gonna get you. But a lot of data has not been looked at recently, or has not been classified effectively, or there's not enough depth of metadata. So you might know kind of what it's supposed to have, but you don't know, let's say, the shape and the size of that data over time. Has it grown? Has it shrunk? You're not tracking whether the data.
Is it a bigger risk or a bigger opportunity kind of thing? Is that what you're thinking? Or
Yeah, well, I'm saying it's equally as bad. In fact, it can be worse because you can have a false sense of security. If you're generating reports that you've been looking at for the last 20 years, and suddenly that data source is like not good anymore, and no one's been checking on it, unless you have something actively to go check.
Sounds like a fire drill. That sounds like a fire drill. Yeah.
Well, yeah, basically the veracity of your sources have to be checked through the whole chain of custody. And if you don't do that actively, then you have a fundamental problem. So the older organizations, the ones that are in heavily regulated industries, have this problem. Lots of silos, lots of tools, and partially understood data. So those are the three that I see for them. It's not just a single monolithic data explosion. It's a little bit more nuanced for them. And that's basically how I see that.
Cool. Yeah, so I was just going to say we've gone a few minutes now. So I was going to ask if anybody in the audience wants to raise a question, please put it into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And even if you're brave enough, you might want to come up on stage, interact directly live with the panel, our esteemed panel. Obviously, don't ask me any questions, but ask the panel questions. But while we're waiting for you to kind of put your thoughts in motion, I suppose one of the things I was just going to say is, I suppose that and I suppose one of the questions, I suppose, just to follow on, was about the tools. People have spent a lot of money. Everybody's got every imaginable tool to clean the data, analyze it, govern it. How do you get them to work together instead of just adding to the chaos and creating more data silos? Any perspectives on that you want to share? I don't know, Akhil, what you've bought over your tenure at Convex. Is that, are you trying to keep it as simple? Try to keep it as simple as possible, and because it is if I go back to my buying days, it's quite a challenging conversation to try and work out where do you buy capability, because there's so many different options on the market, isn't there?
Yeah, so I can give you examples of my days in the enterprise world where we inherited a lot of tools, and you almost had access to every imaginable tool that money could buy in those organizations, because everybody has a firm favorite, isn't it? And you buy tools for different reasons, and then you have a plethora of them. And the challenge, as you rightly pointed out, is how do you integrate them? How do you kind of get them and in a straight line, hold hands together and sing the same song all at the same time? And the challenge that you have is, where do you find the information that you're really after? And how do you reconcile all of them together? Because as I was stressing at the start, trust is the fundamental thing. And if people cannot trust the data because it's sitting in different systems and different tools managing the information are telling you a different story of that information, then you can have all the tools, but you don't know how to use them.
That's quite a scary place to be, isn't it? Sounds like.
Exactly. So what we've done at Convex is we've kept our story very simple. We've not tried to make the entire stack too complex. We try and stick to having one tool for one or more purposes. We try and avoid duplication where we can, just to make sure that there is one place to go to. Will that tool ever be perfect? No. Am I aiming for perfection? The answer is no. It's got to be good enough. It's got to solve the problems that we have and give us the leverage to be able to tackle some of the problems that we don't know of in the future. I am looking for more organizations that want to grow with us rather than give us the final product and say, here you are. Because like Mike was saying, you don't know what you don't know, right? And Andrew had the matrix. So there's no point in locking yourself into places where there is rigidity. What you need is flexibility. And the flexibility needs to come with the changing environment and the changing needs of the organization.
Are you also saying that you don't go, because there's obviously some players that say they've got everything in their kit bag. You're saying it's more of a kind of best of breed to pick a selection of tools that give you that best capability in that particular capability area. Is that what you've gone down as a strategy?
Yeah. So we use the right tool for the right purpose. And yes, I think I can. I've been around for a few years. You can imagine that everybody loves the products that they build, and they want to make sure that it tries to do everything. But in my experience so far, nothing does everything. So you got to make sure that, and that tool might be absolutely brilliant in a context, in a specific business, to answer a specific question. It might not be suitable for the context that I'm operating in. So it's not necessarily the tool is not great. Maybe it doesn't fit into the context and answer the questions that I need and my users need of that tool.
You've got to kind of actively govern that, haven't you? Because otherwise you can get things that get stretched into other areas that could be dangerous, I presume.
Exactly. And it's like, yeah. I'm deliberately trying to avoid a topic that will take us down the rabbit hole.
No problem.
But you have to make sure you give the right people the right tool and the access to the right information, because otherwise it can turn into a disaster. But also make sure that you're making the information accessible, because if the data team or the providers of data become the bottleneck, then you slow the organization down. So how do you strike a balance between governing the data? And I actually hate the word govern, because I think it is a very negative term, right? So how do you make sure that you can create that culture where everybody feels responsible for the data, but at the same time make sure that they are empowered to use the data in the right way, rather than providing conflicting answers?
Well, it's the point that Andrew raised before about the agility piece, isn't it? You can kind of go from one extreme to another, and you kind of you end up TikToking. Not that we're going to put this video on TikTok, by the way. Never seen that. Mike, any perspectives from your side of it?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk to this topic for days, but keeping it really tight. I've done, with regard to the purchase of technology, I've done a best of breed model. I ended up with a stack. I had to train lots of people in lots of different products. I had to then invest in the integration. But I had a phenomenally powerful platform to be able to do things. I've also gone down the other route, where I've effectively got and bought an ERP for data. And I've simplified the whole thing down, and from a training and a development and a availability, and I haven't got people pointing fingers at each other, but I'm constrained by what I can do. And so for me, how do I choose comes down to the organization that I'm in, and to be being really clear about linking the business strategy to the data, and the data strategy, creating the data strategy to support that, which allows me to actually turn the unknown unknowns into known unknowns. And then, I can then make decisions about which is the right way to take all of that sort of stuff. Because there is no right or wrong answer to this, certainly in my experience. It needs to be good enough to allow you to answer the business question that you need to be able to answer. And that's for the practitioners in the organizations to decide.
I mean, my view is that at least there's going to be some shakeout at some point, because you look at some of these matrices that are in CB Insights and various different Gartner matrices, and there can't be any more tools that can be brought out. But you never say never. Andrew, any perspectives from your side?
I think we beat this one down pretty well. And Akhil and Mike have actually covered the topic pretty well.
Cool. Well, we're now just coming up to the hour, and I've not seen anybody dare enough to say they're going to come up on stage. But don't be shy. There's always time. So we're going to just. I think we've got a question here about. One of the questions that's just come in is about the piece to do with living in production. So how do you operate on a living production process? If your systems are legacy, but they're vital to generate revenue, what's the best way to bring innovation into that? How do you transition that? So you've got a set of systems that are legacy systems. They're your engine room to generate revenue. How do you transition and innovate on that? Any perspectives on that? Andrew, maybe we can kick off with you.
Sure. So when I first started at the NYC Euronext, we created a brand new matching engine. It was with a little startup called Archipelago, and it was ridiculously fast. And what they did was, I don't know if I can say that, but what they did is they made some compromises in certain areas to trade for that speed. And it was very controversial at the time. The rationale was basically, if you're not fast enough, you're not going to get any business anyway. So what's the matter? And history will judge that decision for what it is. But you have a matching engine that's running and that's like helping part of the world GDP. How do you unplug it and plug in this new thing that could blow up on the first day? That would be a pretty bad black eye and piss off a lot of people and cost a lot of money. So that's a big problem. So how do you do this? Well, besides saying very carefully in other pejorative terms, you have to really think about the outcomes. Yeah, we did the traditional thing. We ran it in stealth mode simultaneously. But at some point,
so you did parallel running basically before you could switch.
Yeah. But none of that matters until you actually do it. You can do all the preparation work you can, but sometimes you have to just do it. And so my point was actually not the obvious one, which is sometimes you can do all the preparation, but sometimes you just got to do it, because really the alternative is far worse than not doing anything. So at that point, the decision becomes a lot clearer. So the problem really was whether to do it, not do it, is it safe? It was really the question of, can we afford not to do this? Right? And that was the right question. And in hindsight, that was the right question to ask. And that's the right one that we had answered back then. And for many organizations, it will be the right answer. Maybe not all. Nothing is, universally correct or consistent. But at some point, you just got to do it.
You got to bite the bullet.
Yeah. I mean, you should prepare, do everything possible. And in certain cases, you can do a soft rollout or whatever, on a holiday or something. But at some point, you just got to do it. It really goes to the culture of agility, right? If you're so cautious that you go so slow that you're not agile anymore, then it doesn't matter, because somebody will run right past you.
But then that goes back to culture and setting the project up or the change up for success, isn't it? About putting the right leadership in place. Oh,
Absolutely.
Mike's waving at me again.
Yeah, so, well, the way I've addressed that question is I built a bimodal operating model.
Right. You mean like the cheetah and the elephant, is it?
Well, I suppose so, yeah. I guess the other animals, a tortoise and a hare, but yeah, but I had to do a few other things, which I hope are a useful takeout. So in building the bimodal operating model, of course, we had to have people who were willing to keep the lights on the legacy systems. But there was a real appetite for change on their legacy system, so they wanted improvements. So what was the point in doing the improvements on the legacy systems, which were about efficiency and marginal gain, versus the other mode, which was about building new things quickly and. So we had to get agreement to try and constrain the change agenda on the legacy estate while we were trying to build the new things in the digital data estate.
The digital twin, yeah.
Yeah, the digital twin, right. And of course, then when you're building the digital twin, back to all the points we've been making earlier around business process re-engineering and making it a digital business rather than making it a digital version of the existing business, so not a replatforming but a reinventing. And Andrew made the point earlier about lots of new products, new markets, and when he was talking about the pharmaceutical industry. So building the bimodal operating model which and there's lots of stuff out there about building a bimodal operating model, but actually building the operating model and then the organizational structure and then getting everybody to buy into the organizational structure is not easy, right?
Well, I suppose the build also be building the data architecture as well as part of that.
Well, you're building the data architecture in the new data architecture in the digital twin. You've still got the legacy systems and the legacy systems architecture you have in the old world, and at some point you have to be able to transition the data from the one to the other. So building quality and migration and all those sorts of things have to be taken into account. But the thing that I'm trying to emphasize here is much more, to answer the question, was much more about the organizational implications of this than the technological implications of it. So minimizing building the operating model, building the org structure, allocating people between the old world and the new world, and that's always contentious. So how, constraining the amount of change in the old world was a really important aspect of this. And then one of the things that we did, which was to keep everybody focused and recognizing that everybody had a development path. We built an academy for everybody to go through the academy so that they would actually be able to get trained in the new tools and the new technologies and new systems, even though they may be charged with keeping the lights on the legacy estate. And that academy was the thing that actually helped people accept where they started off in that journey.
Cool. Thank you for that. I mean, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to throw I'm going to throw a curveball. So I'm going to throw a bluebird into the discussion. So given that every time I look at LinkedIn these days, there is something that's mentioned, and we can't do this. We can't finish this webinar without getting a one-liner from each of you about what is the impact of ChatGPT with regard to data management in the future. So Akhil, one-liner on that.
It might be slightly longer than a one-liner.
A two-liner.
I think it's a wonderful piece of technology, and like any technology change, we first fear it and then we embrace it, and it's going to go through that journey. So it's not so much about can the technology do what it says on the tin. I think we have. I actually got it to very strangely, and I asked ChatGPT to write me a rap song on data, and try it if you have.
Oh, cool. Well, you can't say that. I'm not going to try. Do it now. You see, not do it now.
I can share it with everybody, but it's not right.
You got to put your hat on sideways. Because.
Yeah, so my team's asked me to do a video on it. So at some point, the idea is that it's very clever, it's very intelligent. It can be used for much more constructive things than like I've used it for. But it's how do you integrate it with your ecosystem? And going back to the question the point that I was raising, and I apologize, I keep harping about, is trust. It's not so much can the technology answer the question that you're after. Can you trust the decision that comes out of it to be able to make business decisions? So would you trust a ChatGPT to say, take all your assets and invest them in this market now? There's 4 billion worth of assets, move from here to there, because I've read a couple of news articles and I can recommend this. Would you take that recommendation on face value, or would you use it as a starting point for the conversation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
It's not the technology. How do you use it? Where do you place it in your decision tree? And it's brilliant to have a summary of information and to give you a starting point. But would we be able to trust it for business critical decisions? My feeling is not yet. We might get there, but it's brilliant to integrate it in your ecosystem and trying to use it for activities that you can automate as much as possible, like back office, call centers. It becomes immensely useful. Sorry,
okay. I know that's slightly longer than one sentence, but yes, thank you for that. So we'll go alphabetically here. Andrew on next. Please build on that.
Alphabetically?
It is Akhil, Andrew. There you go.
Okay. All right. Very good. I think there's like Akhil, because it's always easier to say just like Akhil. I think there is a huge potential. One of the things would be the ability to really focus on a specific problem or a report. And through the conversation, you can really refine the search to have a very sophisticated, nuanced answer. The question is, can you take that answer and repeat it and share it with other people? Now, those technologies haven't yet existed. But if you could create a report or an extract, let's say, or some distillation of some concept through conversation, and through a little testing, back test it, it can be transformative as an interface, right? Can it do it on its own? No, it rests upon the underlying structures that are already there, right? And those interfaces have yet to be built. For instance, ChatGPT can't handle large data sets, right? You need to do special things, extraordinary things. So it's not really ready for an enterprise use yet, but in terms of refinement and sharing collaboration of insights for very specific use cases like reports or concepts, yeah, I think there's a huge potential.
Mr.
And I want the
Fishwick.
chat to GTP. I'm testing out the link, so instead of like typing, you can just talk to it. So it's more sci-fi. So I'm gonna I'll report back on that one.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Fishwick, to wrap up.
Well, we we came in with Akhil talking about being clear what you want to do, being really clear about where you're trying to get to. So I guess my one-liner is ignore the hype curve. Be really clear about what you want to do with it.